Am I the a-hole for telling a guy to shut up during a job interview? I haven't even fully read this one yet. I wanted to comment on it because, for those of you that know me or not, I worked in a restaurant for a long time and I did a lot of the hiring. Well, I did 99% of the hiring. So I have had my fair share of interviews, and boy, I have so many stories and whatnot from crazy interviews. I think I should do a series on that one day. But anyway, here we go. I was interviewing this guy for a very good software engineering position. He passed the first round, and both I and everyone involved in the second round really liked his resume and experience. On paper, he had everything we were looking for, and honestly, this looked like a life-changing opportunity for him. Then he shows up very serious and not smiling at all. I'm used to that in tech interviews, and I understand it can be an intimidating environment. Honestly, as an interviewer, I, try to put people at ease as best I could, but for a lot of people, interviews are very, very nerve-wracking. So for the most part, when I interviewed people, I really tried to separate the nervousness that they had, but a little bit at the same time. For example, when I would be looking for servers or for host positions, people who are going to be talking to guests a lot, talking to strangers a lot, if there was too much nervousness, then, obviously that would stand out. But anyway, sorry. We did a round of introductions, and then he opened the interview by saying, "Let me tell you a little bit about myself." We said, "Okay, go for it." He started talking about his personal and professional background. After about 3 minutes, I jumped in to ask a follow-up question based on something he mentioned. He replied, "I will answer, just give me a moment," and continued talking. A coworker jumped in with another question, and he said the same thing to her. At this point, we were kind of looking at each other, but decided to let him continue and give him the benefit of the doubt. But after more than 5 minutes, I jumped in again with another question. I had to talk over him to do it. He finally paused and answered, but in such a long-winded way that he ended up veering into another topic. My coworker asked another question, and the same thing happened. At this point, I was ready to end the interview. I tried to politely wrap it up several times, but he was unable to read the room and just kept talking. I finally raised my voice slightly and said something like, "Thank you very much for sharing your background. In the interest of time, I'd like to ask if you have any questions for us." This is standard protocol and helps us prepare for future interviews. He asked a question about the team. As I was answering, he raised his finger and interrupted to talk more about his background. I let it go. Then he asked another question, which my coworker started to answer, but again he spoke over her to talk about himself. I tried once more to interrupt politely, but he kept talking. At this point, I was done. I said, "John, you really have to shut up and listen." Oh, I wish I could have said that. I mean, whenever I dealt with somebody that was like talking a lot, I kind of did what they said in their first bit there was I would just be like, for the sake of time, I do have other interviews and this has been really, really great, but there's just a couple things I really want to touch on. I never want to make it seem like you don't have time for an interview, but in the restaurant industry, it's a lot different. Or, if I'm the only manager on doing an interview and like 10 people are behind me and they need something, and of course, this is the one interview where somebody wants to talk my head off. So, anyway, you always just try to be as polite as you can and say, "Oh, that's, interrupt." Unfortunately, but just be like, "That's really wonderful, but there's a couple of things I really need to touch on." Simple as that. I really wish I could have just told somebody to shut up. So, anyway, he was surprised, as was my coworker, but he finally stopped talking. I continued. "You walked into this room with a 99% chance of getting the job. Now that chance is 0. The only reason is because in less than 15 minutes, you've demonstrated that you don't have the capacity to listen at all. So I'm telling you now, you're not getting the job, but if you take anything away from this interview, let it be this. No matter how good you are technically, if you can't listen, you'll never excel in this career." He apologized and said, "Can we start again?" I replied, "You had your chance. Best of luck to you in future endeavors. Make sure you listen." Looking back, I know I could have handled it differently, but I still feel bad for the guy. So, I don't know. This is hard because you're never out there to hurt someone's feelings, but in my job, with human resources and that type of stuff, there's a lot, like, you're not, you can't say. So when somebody would be like, oh, how did my interview go? You had to keep it pretty basic. But me as a human, I've always wanted to be honest with people, because I do believe that, I want to say, like, 90% of people suck at interviews. Like, they just do terrible. And granted, that's from my opinion. But interviews after doing hundreds of interviews, I mean, honestly, 90% of them really suck. I wouldn't say really suck. They suck in the sense of it's just the same thing, right? Or they have behaviors that really, like, are inappropriate, like in his sense, where he's just interrupting and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, that really could have been nervousness. So it's like, maybe she could have given him a second chance and been a little bit more polite about it. But at the end of the day, she just had enough and laid it out for him. Probably not to be told to shut up, but I don't know. Like I said, as a person, I think you should be allowed to give feedback on interviews, because, again, with people not being graded in it, I always thought to myself, like, I wish I could tell them what it was that I saw, or things that they said that really, stopped me from moving forward in the hiring process, so that maybe if the next time they got an interview somewhere, they would be able to better learn that skill. Because there's no, you don't practice interviews, you know what I mean? Like, there's nowhere you can practice interviews for the most part. And if you're, like, telling your friend, like, oh, let's practice an interview, but they don't interview people professionally, like, they're not going to be able to help you, right? That's why I've always kind of thought, too, I'm like, maybe I should create something, like, doing interview tips and stuff. So anyway, if anybody's interested in that, let me know. But at the end of the day, she's very straightforward with him. He was being, kind of rude, especially, like, interrupting and talking over them. She didn't have to say shut up, but it is what it is. It clearly got him to stop talking, and she kind of hit her point. So I don't know. What do y'all think?